Welcome back to Think Twice MTG. I'm Drew,
And I'm Alan.
and we've got a topic to cover today that's just going to knock your socks off. Alan, why don't you tell them what we got, what we're, yeah,
It's the things. Tell them the things, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to be talking about today, and I struggled finding really like a good succinct, very short way to say it. But it's finding what you enjoy in the game. And very quickly this will become apparent. And it may seem at first some people are like, wait, what do you mean? I enjoy the game. That's what I enjoy. So why do we have to talk about this? But really, I think there's a lot more in the like within the game that leads to various reasons why people like the game. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to start with something that WotC has developed as a way to kind of explain the different ways that people engage with the game, and then I think we're going to expand into it there. We'll talk about some card spotlights as usual, and then we have a new segment starting that we'll get to
Oh,
at the end, everybody. So just hold on to your butts.
I'm excited.
I
I
know,
think it's going to be fun.
yeah. So I guess we can just jump right into it. We're talking about find what you enjoy the game. So where we're starting is that Wizards of the Coast, the company that makes Magic, also known as WotC, at some point, I don't know, probably many moons ago at this point, developed 5 psychographic profiles in order to try to explain their perception of the different ways that players choose to engage with the game of Magic. Their names are Timmy, Johnny, Spike, Vorthos, and Melvin. Why are 2 of them not actual names? I don't know. You don't need rules for things. And as I've said, these profiles are meant to kind of capture the different styles of players, and so the different ways and the different reasons why people choose to engage with the game of Magic. Because if you've played Magic for any amount of time, it becomes very apparent very quickly that different players have different goals and there's lots of different ways to engage with the game. So we are going to be exploring that. But before we dive into exploring these 5 profiles, I think there's also some very serious limitations with trying to shove every player into one of these 5 boxes. And that's where we're going to develop after we talk about them a little bit.
Okay. Well, let me just read off the first one we have here. We have Timmy likes to do big, cool things. The manner of the win matters more than the quantity. Um, I've never been a Timmy.
Yeah, I think Timmy is a really good name for this one because it sounds exactly like the way I picture it in my head. Like, because Timmy sounds like the little kid,
Yeah,
and this is exactly the little kid thing. To me, it's I want to do the biggest, coolest thing, and I don't really care if it's actually good because the
right.
one time I pulled it off is going to be a cool enough story is going to fuel me for the next 5, 10, 20, 50 times that the thing doesn't work, because what if it works the one time? Yeah, I've certainly never been a Timmy either, at least with this game. I don't know if I was ever a Timmy with anything, but these descriptions are my ways of trying to succinctly capture who the player is. It's not the way that WotC described it. They probably used way more words and tried to make everybody sound just as good as everybody else, and I don't think I did. But so like Timmy is the person who wants to do like, oh man, if I just get this big dragon and this big dinosaur in together and then they do the thing, isn't it so cool? And you look at their deck and it's packed full of cards that all cost 7+ mana, and there's nowhere near enough lands, and it's just because it's all the cool big stuff. When I
Yeah,
think
I've got
of,
another. I
yeah,
got
you got,
another definition for Timmy's.
yeah, go for it.
These are the kids.
Yeah, just there
These are
you
the
go.
these are the kids that play Magic. So like, we have a couple of kids that are playing at our F and M right now. One of them, at least one of them's got a dinosaur themed deck. One of them was
Yep.
talking about making a life gain themed deck, and I was like, I remember
Yeah.
thinking about this kind of stuff when I started playing. Now I was in my early 30s, and he's 10,
Yeah.
but I do think that these psychographic profiles, you start building them when you start playing.
Yeah, because like you naturally have things that you're like, oh, this is gonna be fun, this is gonna be enjoyable, this is gonna be cool. One card I think of that is probably generally going to be considered a Timmy card. You remember when they first came out with Ixalan and the Galta they printed? I believe it's called Galta Primal Hunger, and it was
This one that gets its cost reduced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's a 12/12 with it gets its cost reduced, so it makes it not quite exactly a Timmy card, but it's like it's just a big thing. And so like that's the kind of thing that to me Timmy likes to do is I like to do the big thing. It wants to be splashy, it wants to be huge, and it's not necessarily about being streamlined and efficient and all of those other types of things that we'll talk about with some of these other profiles.
The thing about Timmy's that I don't understand is like I get it when it's the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I had years ago, I think it was a pre-pandemic, I was playing a guy and he was on like an Eldritch Evolution. What is the big dinosaur? It's like a combo piece dinosaur in like Neoform decks.
Oh yeah. God, I don't remember what it's called, but
So well, this will give you an idea of how long ago it was. I was playing Cryptic Command main deck.
Ooh, yeah, that is going back there, isn't it?
And I was sitting there winning the game, and I had all my mana up in just firm control, and like the only way this guy could win the game was to basically like hit his combo, and then I have nothing. I have to have nothing.
Okay.
So he top decks his Neoform or whatever it was that he needed, and he put it on the stack, and then I went to counter it with Cryptic, and he literally begged me. He was like, "Let me just do my thing. We can put the results in any way you want, but like, just let me do my thing." And I had never played this guy before, and I didn't know if I let him do his thing, if he'd actually be cool about it.
Yeah, if it actually like be like, no, okay, you won.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm mad at Timmy, and I put Cryptic on the stack and took care of it. But
This will hint, and land a little better as we go on through the show. But like the guy begging for for you to let him do his thing was denying you doing your thing. Right. And so like that's where like people have to understand like this is a zero-sum game. You sit down with two people, one is going to walk away with the result they want and one is not. And so like him begging you for that, it's like, just let me do my thing. You're like, yeah, but the thing I like to do is say, no, that thing doesn't happen. And I know at least for a certain part of your playing career, that was like the thing that you loved to do more than any other. So
yeah, one psychological profile that isn't on the list is what was commonly referred to as a griefer, which was someone who just caused other players grief. And no matter like, so Lantern of Insight.
Yep.
Decks, anyone who runs that could easily be qualified as a griefer.
I played against Lantern at our last FNM.
Yeah, it's making a comeback. This is interesting.
I don't think it's making a comeback in terms of it's actually really good. I think it's just that there's a certain small number of people out there that are Lantern gamers, and that's what happens. Like in every streamer's chat that I see, it's like every single video I watch on YouTube, there's somebody in the chat and like, hey, streamer X, when are you going to play Lantern Control? And they're like, never. I'm just not going to do that. One, I don't want to play the deck because I don't think it's good. And two, nobody wants to watch that.
It's so boring to watch.
Yeah. I do have to say, from the time that you played that deck, I felt much more comfortable sitting down and realizing that was the matchup because I was like, oh, I know how to play against this deck. Here we go. And we had a moment where both my opponent and I knew I had Boseiju in hand, and he had Lantern, Codex Shredder, and Pixis out, and I wasn't destroying anything because the top of his library kept on being bad draws. And we talked about it after the game. He was like, when you didn't fire off the Boseiju on the Lantern at the first opportunity, I knew I was in trouble.
Yeah.
He's like, because you realized the thing that you were just going to save it for a good piece and not something else, because I already had something on board and, whatever. And so, like, I was like, I'm set to win. I can just keep on plussing my grist and hitting you with one bugs. So here we go. But yeah, so thank you 7 years ago, Drew.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So that's Timmy. We get sidetracked. People deal with it. That's Timmy, the first of the profiles. The next one on the list is Johnny. The way I kind of summarize Johnny is it's the most important thing in the game is originality and creativity. So like Johnny cares more about doing their thing than always doing the quote unquote best thing. And it's not that any of these profiles are not trying to win, but it's for all of them but one, winning isn't the end all be all. And so like the way I kind of tried to phrase it was that Johnny wants to win but wants to do it their way. What are your thoughts on Johnny and that description? I feel like it's maybe missing something, but I can't seem to quantify what.
Well, so this is where I started for sure. I wanted to figure out what the next best deck was.
Mm-hmm.
And I have since moved away from this mentality, not entirely, but I have moved away from it. But I can't seem to kick the idea that the format and all of the cards are totally solved, and that metas, card choices, synergies are 100% discovered. Like there's always a part of the map that hasn't been completely colored in yet. That's just my thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always going to be some percentage of a Johnny, not a Johnny, the Planeswalker.
Yeah.
Let's classify. So I'm enough of I'm competitive enough where I'm not going to be talking about some kind of 7 mana sorcery in Modern. We're like, ooh, if I can cheat this out, or if I have this 4-card combo of all terrible cards in order to do this one thing, in order to, like, I feel like you're more of like a Timmy at that point, but like,
yeah,
just like understanding card quality, synergy, trying to put those things together in ways that the format hasn't like organically created.
Okay.
Is what I would consider to be a Johnny type player. I think that's it.
Yeah. So, along those lines, Johnny is, I guess to me, the player that will openly admit the reason why they don't play certain things, and they're okay with that.
Well, I used to just be dead set against playing red cards. I just hated it.
Yeah.
I thought red cards were for stupid people, and
You said that many times.
they were just way too straightforward. There was no mystery about what red was doing. I hated it. And then the more that you move toward like an analytical
Mm-hmm.
type of player, the more you realize, okay, that's not what red's really about.
Right, yeah.
And so you got to kind of open yourself up to other possibilities. But
I mean, the other side of the coin would be somebody that thinks that blue is just about like being a jerk and saying no to people, and you'd be like, well, no, there's so much more to what blue can do. It's about smoothing out your draws and having threats that aren't just big and powerful but have a precision to use. And blue is much more a scalpel rather than a hammer kind of color, and a red player would have the same response back, and it took you a while to get there, and
Straight up years.
yeah, now you're just firmly ensconced in
Yeah.
the red
I
portion of
still
the color pie.
I still hate red, but I play it.
Begrudgingly, he grumbles
Yeah.
every single time, folks. Every single time.
Yeah.
These stupid red mages and their
Stupid red
stupid
cards.
cards that I have to play.
Suck.
Yeah. So Johnny is the player that's like, oh, like doing my thing or doing the creative thing, or I don't know. I think people that want to talk negatively about Johnny's will say that Johnny's the player that needs to feel smart.
Yeah, that is a part of it. Like I play Magic because it's an intellectual exercise,
Yeah. Just most of the
and
time that I've heard people use that phrasing, they don't mean it as like, yeah, Johnny's for smart guys, and it's actually like they're like, oh, you just want to feel smart, like, oh, aren't you
yeah,
super cool? Um,
yeah,
so so there's Johnny. Is there? I was trying to come up with like I did with Timmy. I was trying to think of a card that to me kind of encapsulates a Johnny, and I didn't have any that particular came to mind because maybe it's so unique to each Johnny. But
Well, I think cards like what it's like 3 blue green. It goes and gets something, and you can put it on the battlefield.
oh, Bring Delight.
Yeah, something like that. I think um, kind of encapsulates what Johnnies are about. Like, oh, I found this thing that when paired with this other thing, does a lot of work. And it's not
Yeah.
just lightning bolt snapcaster mage.
Hmm.
It's I'm doing this other thing you're not expecting me to do because I want to test out this idea, or I've figured out a way to do this that the meta hasn't organically provided me.
Hmm.
So I think cards like that can be
That,
um
yeah, that's a good example. Good call. Um, so then the third one is probably where I would imagine most players who play the modern format, at least for a majority of their mind space, fit into just by nature of the format. And we can talk about that a little bit later. And that is the profile spike. Spike is the competitive player. They're there to try to win, and they are going to try to win as best as they can with whatever tools they have determined is the best to win. Um, I think to say that winning is the only thing that matters is a little bit disingenuous for Spikes. Um, but like they're there to win, and they're not going to be happy with a moral loss or a moral victory. Um, like it's not like, man, that game was close and so it was fun even if I was on the losing side. They're like, that game was close and it means I could have won, so what did I do wrong and I need to figure it out so I don't do it again,
yeah.
sort of thing. So like I said, I think most people play formats like Modern or Legacy or something like that are going to fall into the Spike profile because you don't get as deep into a format like those ones without like really having put in a lot of time, effort, thought, often monetary investment as well. So, them's the realities, right?
Yeah, I like being a spike
Mm-hmm.
because it allows me an avenue to be analytical about what's going on, both small scale when I'm playing somebody, large scale when it comes to like this matchup versus that matchup, card selection, how the meta's changed, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's been really great actually.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise to most people. Drew and I both will say that we fit into the Spike profile. Um, and I don't think either of us are really apologetic about that. It's we like games partially because of the competition aspect. So, like, hey, this is what we do. I think Spike is probably the easiest to understand.
Yeah.
Once again, players who are critical of the Spike mentality, often Timmy's, I'm calling you out right now. You're the ones who say these things. You call Spike players cutthroat. And I mean, as an insult, and it's just like I said a little bit earlier, like this is a zero-sum game. We all know that when we sit down, one of us is going to lose, and I'm just going to try my hardest within the rules. Cheating does not make you a spike. Cheating makes you a cheater and a scumbag.
Yeah.
Like within the rules, I'm going to do everything I can to try to win. And so some of the things I do that I know make me a spike, and we've talked about some of this stuff before. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast or not, but like I purposefully do not visibly react to things in games. And I know it throws people off because they're used to people being excited when they draw a card or when something happens, they're crestfallen or they're, uplifted or whatever. And I try to be as deadpan as possible. And it's just like, yep, that happens. Yep, that happens. Yep, that happens. And I do that partially because that's kind of my natural demeanor. But also I do it because it is a way to try to eke out all of those little advantages. And if my opponent isn't getting any extra information off of the way I'm sitting, the way I'm carrying myself, the way I'm reacting to things, then I feel like I'm a little bit more likely to win because I know most of my opponents don't do that, and I can read that information off of them, and now I have more tools to work with. It's like I've put another card in my hand.
I'm not very good at that.
What?
I react pretty flamboyantly when something good or bad happens. So, but I mean, that's since we're talking about like why we enjoy things. Like, I enjoy that, to be honest. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I like winning, But like you and I were playing in a match several weeks ago, and I think you had no cards in hand, and I think that I had flipped the game to be in my favor, and you top deck. I thought seized you, and took
Oh,
a card out of your hand, and it like
yes.
real life thought seize bugged,
Yep.
and you just top decked with no manipulation. You just top decked the thing that I took out of your hand,
And then won the
and
game
just
that
switched
turn.
it right back forward. Yeah,
Yeah, then won the game that turn because of that card.
and I shot out of my chair like a firecracker had been lit under me.
Yeah,
So
that card everybody happened to be Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which
oh
is
god,
which is a nutso card.
that's really good.
So take take that with account. But yeah, that was we were. I guess God, was that just last week? That was when
No,
um
it was longer than that. No, so we play at your place
yeah,
relatively regularly, and the same exact thing happened. I've been getting thought seize bugged in real life
yeah.
pretty regular
Mm-hmm.
in 2025. So yeah,
You,
I took something out and I had flipped it again, and I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about this. He just has to not top. Okay, got it.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens. That's why they have the saying, you can't thought seize bullshit. Because, well, you can't. Um, but, yeah, so, I think a good example of a card that a spike is like to play is a card that Drew just absolutely hates with so much passion and fire. And that is Ragavan Nimble Pilferer.
That card is dumb.
Yeah.
That card is pushed so hard. It's so obvious that they were like, no, Monkey Pirate. Oh, we definitely want this to get played. I know. Let's slap a paragraph of text
Yeah.
onto this thing. I mean, it is. I mean, and there was a minute there where it was like, oh, this thing hits you, you might just lose the game.
I mean,
You
I,
know?
I think when I first started playing the card, like I was kind of just mentally keeping track, and I remember at one point like you and I were talking, and maybe it was like after an F&M match or something like that, and I was like, I'm 12 for 12 winning
Yeah,
games when I hit with Ragavan one time.
yeah,
And it's like, that's astounding because it's a 2-1. Like my creature dealt 2 damage, and every time that had happened, I did not lose. Um, and so like, okay, yeah, but like I think this is a good example of a card because like you said, like it's so obviously powerful off the top that it's a card that almost says like, hey, I have to play it, which is now maybe something we should ponder for a second because the card is barely played in Modern. Whatever that says is, I guess you can determine for yourself what that says about the format, good or bad. But this is the type of card because it's like, hey, this is just hyper efficient. It does really good things. It's strong and powerful. So I'm playing it not because I'm playing a Pirates deck. It doesn't care about pirate synergies. Not because I think it's just cool to have a monkey on my card. These are the things that Spikes don't care about, is what the picture is on the card, what the name of it is. It's what does the card do? And maybe that kind of like hints at something we talked about last episode when we were talking about the Universes Beyond stuff. And you had asked me what I thought, and my overall point was, I don't really care what's on the card. Am I more likely to pick a version of a card because I like the image or because, hey, I like that Lord of the Rings character? Sure. But just give me a card that does a thing I want. And that was very much the Spike in me talking at the time. So, there we go. I want to breeze over the next profile really fast because I think it's the one that as soon as you get beyond casual.
Magic to do this.
Yeah. The next one is called Vorthos. What is the word is? I don't know. They made it up. And it's simply the person who plays things that make sense with the story. And so one, you'd have to actually follow the story well enough to know it. And then you're basically just only playing thematic things like, oh, well, no, these two people were enemies. They wouldn't be together. So, or they're from a different plane, so they couldn't be together because one of them's not a planeswalker. So, like, whatever, that profile does not leave the casual kitchen table. And so I don't think it's even worth talking about. Sorry if you're somebody listening, you're like, that's me. I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but thanks.
I honestly don't know that I've ever met a true Vorthos.
So. Yeah. I don't think the Magic story is strong enough to really support those people.
Well, they're making a movie.
Cool.
It got announced. I'll probably go.
Yeah, I mean, right? But so then we've got the fifth of the profiles, and this one is called Melvin. And this one, if you look up WotC's stuff, they sort Vorthos and Melvin slightly separately from the other three. And it's because it's kind of like, I guess, I don't know if it's a subset or something different, but so they say Vorthos and Melvin are a little bit different. Melvin is what I call a card nerd. And it's that they enjoy like understanding why the cards work and how like the rules interact to make this card work. And for them, understanding why things happen and what makes them go and seeing all of those kind of inner workings happening is just as enjoyable as playing.
So is this the guy that listens to Mark Rosewater's podcast on the way to work?
I think maybe in some aspects, because he does have episodes where he talks about like, oh, how we came up with this and stuff. I think it's also like somebody who just like enjoys understanding the whys behind all things. Like they're the person that watches the YouTube channels that are just like, hey, we went to this manufacturing facility today and we're just going to show you how it works. And you're like, I've never thought about wondering how plastic water bottles are made, but I'm going to sit here riveted to the TV for the next hour while they walk me through it. Did you ever watch back in the day, Discovery Channel had a show called How It's Made?
I've heard of it. I've never watched it.
Okay. So I used to watch the show all the time, and hint, people, there's some Melvin in this guy right here. Okay. And Drew's smiling, got him now. So the show How It's Made was literally basically what I just described. It was a show that just went to different manufacturing facilities or whatever, and they're like, we're just going to show you how things are made. The show did not have people in it unless it was in the shot of somebody manipulating whatever was being created. They didn't have an actual host. There's just a guy who just did a voiceover, and it was just static camera shots. And it's like, here's this machine, and look, they're making candy canes, and like the candy cane rolls out of the machine, and then it cuts and it's shaped, and then it's dropped into a box. And I used to watch this show all the time. I used to fall asleep to this show in college my freshman year of college, it was on from like 11 to midnight on Discovery every day, and they just played it through just all the seasons in a loop. And at some point during the seasons of the show, the voiceover guy changed. And I remember distinctly, I watched the show so much that I had fallen asleep during the first episode of the evening. And so 11:30 hits and the new episode starts, and it's when the new voiceover guy came on, and I woke up
Yeah.
because like something in my body had a visceral reaction to the host changing. I woke up and I was like, something's wrong. And then I sat there for a second. I'm like, the voice is different, and I couldn't do it anymore.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, but that show was fascinating, and it was like, oh my god, I would sit there for hours and just watch what would objectively be to most people some of the most boring material you've ever considered. And I'm just like, yeah, this is so cool. How do they make candy canes? I don't even particularly like candy canes. But I was just like, I'm gonna sit here and watch this, and I'm gonna do nothing else. I'm just gonna stare. So if you've ever done that with something, you might have some Melvin in you, everybody.
Well, I've become more interested in like I think our last episode was like determining power level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've taken a look at cards with a more focused eye, I'd say, to try and figure out like what they do as opposed to like physically making them. Is that like what you're talking about? Like,
Yeah, I think it's like how the mechanics work, and like why this interaction happens in this way and why this one does this and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I don't think it's about the physical manufacturing of the cards, but like why the cards work within the rule set of the game.
yeah, so I would say I'm becoming like there's a little bit more of a Melvin attitude in me recently, since the banning of the One Ring.
Okay.
But certainly, I think it's my third archetype. Spike Johnny Melvin would be, to some percentages, would be
Mm-hmm.
how I stack up. So
Okay. I don't know if there's any one particular card that really captures a Melvin, because it's kind of like I like all the cards and it's about why the cards work and whatnot. So I mean,
I'll bet I have an idea.
oh, you got one? Hit me with it.
Well, I don't know about. I'm gonna pick a format and not a card.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Commander.
Okay.
So like Commander EDH was started because judges wanted a format that allowed them to investigate card interactions and therefore
Oh.
rules interactions.
Okay.
And so now it might be the most popular format in Magic.
It's probably the most popular format that has actual format rules if you don't consider like kitchen table just whatever to be a format. But yeah, I would say in terms of the formats, it is the most popular format by far.
And they design cards specifically for Commander now.
True.
So I think that, and I don't know how far away they've deviated from their, this is really just kind of a thought experiment played out in real time. But I would say that's where Commander started, is like a bunch of Melvins wanted to figure out. Would you say Melvins become judges more often?
I think much more likely to become judges, which probably explains why I act as de facto judge at our FNMs as well, is just because like it's not that I was like, well, fine, somebody needs a judge, grumble, grumble, go learn cards. I'm kind of just interested, and so I pay attention to how cards work and like how the rules interact with each other. And then it just so happened that then the guy who runs the store would be serving as the judge, but then he started realizing that I knew cards really well, so then he'd take the judge call and walk over to me and say, hey, what's this? And then he'd go back and tell them the ruling. And so we just kind of took out the middleman for the most part. And so when I'm there, it's just like, call judge, and I'll be like, tell my opponent like, hey, hold on a second. Or I'll be like, hey, can you guys ask across the table? Because I'll answer it. But yeah, so I think that's probably a safe assumption, is that Melvins are more likely to become judges than other players.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So I mentioned at the opening of the episode that I think these 5 profiles have glaring weaknesses. And it's that they're designed to be like, oh, what are you? I'm a Timmy. I'm a Spike. I'm a Melvin. But like most people don't fit into one of these buckets. We've kind of already hinted at some of this. And so it's like you're actually like, well, I'm a little bit of this. I'm some of this. Sometimes I'm this with certain considerations and things like that along the way. So you might be in some ways one of these profiles, but you're certainly not only one, or at least very, very few people are only one.
Right.
And so like we've kind of hinted a little bit here, Drew, about like where we fit, but like do you think that you're a mix of 2, a mix of 3, mostly one but with like sprinklings of others? Where do you see yourself?
So I would say I would define myself as 80% Spike, 15% Johnny, 5% Melvin.
Okay.
And it's just because every once in a while something will be like, ooh, Melvin-ish thing here that's got me interested about it. Or
Gotcha.
like I have an idea that I want to explore, but all of those things take place under the umbrella of I'm only doing this because I want to win and I want to explore the space of winning.
Yeah, I think that my numbers would probably be similar to yours, but I'd probably call myself something more like 70% Spike, 25% Melvin, 5% Johnny. Just because like I'm just fascinated, and this is what happens with everything I get into. I'm fascinated by the way the game works. It's not that I like don't care about winning when I sit down, but also the things that engage me the most with the game are the things that I think kind of tap into that like, ooh, I'm the mad scientist tinkerer sort of thing where like I need to understand how the thing works so that then I feel like I'm being purposeful in how I go. If you watch the TV show Heroes, it's kind of like Siler's ability where he'd have to like, I have to understand how things work. And like, he'd take apart watches just to figure out the way it function. And then, you have some psychopath tendencies on that side, but hopefully I didn't say that. Nobody. No. So it's kind of like that. Like I kind of just have this drive to always understand why the thing works that does, versus I know there are other people that I've come across in my life. They're like, I don't really care why it works. I just know it does. Right. And so, that's kind of where I see myself. And that really kind of then gets into like, I think that captures a good way that I thought of to express what the problem with the profiles is that they don't cover so many of these other things that define why we like the game. Because yes, we all like playing Magic, but we all like playing the game for a little bit different reasons, and the profiles don't cover any of that nuance that we just talked about, like, oh, well, I'm this much of this thing and that much of this thing, so I've got a little bit of this here. Because I don't consider myself a Johnny, but I know I have some of it because there are certain types of things I don't like to play. I've had 2 decks that at different times in Modern were extremely popular and extremely good at varying points in time, if not multiple, that I have picked up, learned to play, and then gotten rid of because it just didn't do it for me. First was probably in 2022, early 2022, I played Amulet Titan for a few months. And the deck was extremely good. Drew, I remember you telling me that like if I just kept on playing that deck, I would just never lose. Yeah. And so I wow, train of thought just completely hit a penny on and derailed. So I learned to play the deck, and I was playing it, and I was learning how it worked and everything, and I just wasn't really having much fun. And I think it's because it is wholly uninteractive for the most part. There might be a couple of cards you play every once in a while that are about like, hey, I need to worry about what my opponent's doing, but it's so much more about putting together the puzzle on your own of how is my deck going to put all the pieces together to come to fruition. And I was just like, oh, it doesn't really matter that I'm sitting across from somebody, besides that sometimes they're able to stop me and I'm not really having this back and forth exchange. And so I put that deck down in, and because I was like, I'm just not having fun with it. And then the other deck that this happened with was the Rhinos deck, the Crashing Footfalls deck. And that deck, I found out, I played it for a total of one FNM. And I just felt like after playing it for probably the 2 weeks prior, getting used to the deck and then playing for that one FNM, was that it is always just about trying to do the exact same thing. Turn 3, resolve a Cascader, put the 2 4/4s into play, and hopefully that's enough to either get you to the next one or just win the game. And I wasn't enjoying it. Like, it was probably easily in the top 3 least enjoyable FNMs I've ever played, and I've offered a lot of FNMs. So, and I was like, oh, this just wasn't really doing it for me. And going through those experiences helped me understand that, like, there are certain things that I really care about. And for me, where that Johnny sprinkling of comes into the spikeness is that I know I need to play decision heavy decks that are also meant to be interactive. And if I'm not doing that, I'm not going to have fun. So while every modern deck has lots of decisions, I need decks that I know are going to make me make a lot of decisions, are going to interact with my opponent, and make it feel that the decisions I made at least contributed, if not were the sole reason why I was able to win that game, because that's the thing I like doing. So even though I consider myself majority a spike, if I come across a deck that is very good but doesn't meet those other criteria, then I'm not going to play it. So I get that's why I don't feel like I can call myself complete spike, because I don't think I'd pick up Boros Energy, for instance, or I don't know, a lot of times name just a very, pedal to the metal sort of deck, because it's just not the kind of thing I like to do. So no, I'm not just 100% spike, because I don't just go and find the best deck in the format and sleeve it up and play it. I like to take my spike mentality and apply it with things that I do enjoy.
I was having a conversation with another player recently, and he was there have been changes to the meta,
Mm-hmm.
and he was trying to figure out like what he should be on, and I know what he likes doing. It was easy, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, dude, you want to turn creatures sideways,
Yeah.
so pick a deck that does that. But I don't really know what I like doing. I have played every type of deck every style of deck at some point in modern. So like I have played aggro decks and mid range decks and control decks and combo decks and griefer decks and
Griefer decks.
just all kinds of stuff
But
I have
never
played,
grief.
and that card sucks.
Yeah. But
So I think that's a better way. That's a better way to describe me, is that there are cards I refuse to play
yeah, for sure.
for certain reasons, but I don't know that there are cards that I'm just like I just want to be doing this. I
Okay.
know I don't want to do that. And so a lot of my Johnniness, let's call it,
Yep.
comes in, merges with my spikeness in order to be like, I just hate whatever the quote unquote best thing is, no
Yeah.
matter what. And I just want to destroy that because they either printed the cards too strong, or like they didn't anticipate this synergy, or whatever. And like that has become a drive for me when I am playing, figuring out what I want to play. I think I would play almost anything if it destroyed the quote unquote best thing that there is going on in the game.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have so rarely thought, oh, I want to play the best deck.
Right.
There have been several exceptions. The one that I think about when I think about playing the quote unquote best deck in a format goes back to when I played Standard and I played White Red Humans.
Oh, you loved that deck.
I could not. I thought that deck was aggro is for stupid people, red is for stupid people, and there's nothing about that deck that recommended itself to me as something I would want to do, and I had the most fun ever playing it.
Okay.
And I was just like, I like winning. Like winning is a huge form of validation that I am doing something right as a player, and that I am getting the result that I'm actively chasing every time that I sit down to play Magic. And like, so, you know, whether it's Burn or White Red Humans or whatever, like aggro decks are good at fulfilling that particular need, you know. And so I'm sure that I would enjoy playing Boros Energy, even though I hate that deck's guts.
Yeah, right. Just because you'd be like, well, I'm winning a lot, so fine.
Yeah, it really soothes a lot of my other stupid nuances that I have about playing the game.
So, Drew, would the ultimate dilemma you could face as a Magic player be that is you build a deck to hate out the most played deck, but then your deck becomes the most played deck? What do you do then?
I probably retire because
I've done it.
I have achieved ultimate Magic nirvana.
Yeah, like that's it. All right, came here, did what I came here to do, everybody. Moving on to the next game. Here we go. Next 15 years, you watch out.
So in the grand tradition of our show and our being in our 5th episode and us tangenting.
Yep. Okay. Tangent time. Do it.
We used to play another game. This is how we met.
Yeah.
Called Star Wars Miniatures, which was a fun game. Maybe not designed to the level of Magic the Gathering.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was fun. And our play group happened to contain people who were at the very top of that game's meta.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very much a Johnny when it came to that game. And I never had any success until I took one idea from a squad that another player was playing and merged it with a different faction.
Okay.
And then I found something that people felt was very difficult to deal with. And I started playing that, and I knew that I had achieved something when our quote-unquote best player came to play one night with a piece-for-piece clone of my squad. And I thought, oh, this is what it must feel like to be on top. You know, and it wasn't that like I was winning a ton. I had designed something that someone who only played to win copied exactly.
He might have been a pure Spike.
Yeah, he's 100% Spike.
Like there's 0% mix for him. It was just whatever is the best thing, I will play it.
Right. And I thought, I've done it. You know, and I haven't achieved that in Magic yet.
But it doesn't stop him from trying, everybody, because I can't tell you how many times that Drew has fired off a message on Discord, sent me a text, showed up for our just, one-on-one play night once a week, and been like, what do you think about... And then he always does the thing where he goes, wait, don't dismiss this out of hand. Actually think about it. That's the reaction. He starts a thought, predicts what I'm going to do, tells me not to do that, and then says, here, think about it. And I think you kind of like briefly hinted at this. There have been different times in your Magic career where you've kind of drifted away from that, I don't know, hunt of your white whale. And of like, I need to build something that's mine. But there definitely is that Johnny aspect in you of like, you want to create a thing that you didn't just take from somebody else and maybe tweak. You wanted to be like, this was my brainchild. I put it together, and that like has some sort of extra value to you in the game that, like, for me, for instance, I've never felt the same way. I've never felt the desire that it needs to be mine. I've tried it a lot of times for some of these other considerations that I put on our list of things the psychographic profiles don't cover. And it's like, well, these are the cards I have, so I have to try it this way, or I can only play these colors. This is the only mana base I can put together. So what can I put together within those bounds? But it wasn't simply because it has to be mine, where I think of the two of us, I am much more happy picking up something that somebody else has designed and just learning how to do it really well if it fits that need of, like, decision heavy, interactive, and my decisions actually matter, and that sort of thing. So
I do think that running, quote unquote, running into these same kind of things in the wild at like an FNM are interesting, because we have a player who, and before the tournament started a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about hardened scales, and
Okay.
he was like, well, don't you think hardened scales is back now that it has opal? And I thought about it for a second, and I was like, I don't really know what opal gives hardened scales, to be honest.
Yeah, if it feels like it's probably a card they should play because there's a bunch of artifacts, but, like, your best turn one play isn't really getting opal into play because you want to have scales into play, and so, like, kind of weird. Do you need extra mana on turn two?
And I know that deck has gone to, like, including blue in it recently, and I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but, like, the more actual colors you play, the more opal seems like a good inclusion.
Right.
But I said like, I don't know that you have to, drop another $900 in order to put those in your deck. You know, like, I think it's probably just good enough doing what it's doing. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I think that's because a lot of players implicitly trust what they see while they're watching a pro tour, what deck 5-0'd on MitGo, or something that they saw in their personal experience that now what I'm saying or what the meta has changed into directly contradicts that experience.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to convince people that this thing now goes against your psychographic profile and you have to adjust in your manner of thinking. Like, and we have people, and I don't know that it matters that much because I don't know that our FNM is all that competitive. But
certainly not
we have some
from
good
top
players.
to bottom. Yeah.
Right. But I'm thinking about it like and what forces me back into being a Johnny so much is that I encounter this rigidity in thought, and I'm just like, okay, well, I have to fight this now because you're not allowing for anything outside this framework that you've come up with as to why this card or deck or format is good.
Okay.
And it's that opinion to me is informed by the type of player that you are based upon these profiles. And so, like, I happen to think our current format is great because we don't have any oppressive decks, and it's largely combo based, which to me forces people to think about what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, that's the format that I want to play in, as opposed to, like, consistent burn mirrors or whatever it would, what might otherwise be.
Just while you were going on with those thoughts, just because I was curious, I pulled up MTG Goldfish to see how many Mox Opals are played in hardened scales lists currently, and it looks like the consensus is 3. So it certainly is like, okay, yeah, that seems like a card that if you really want it, you're putting 4 in because you actually have to draw them. So it's like, yeah, it's probably good enough to include because you have enough artifacts and an extra mana for 0 cost. Doesn't, like, I guess, sure, I'll take it. But it certainly doesn't seem to be a staple of the deck. So just an interesting thing to point out there. But some of the other things that I wrote down in my brainstorming for what are the other kind of influences on player decisions and how they engage with the game that the profiles I don't think are able to cover, um, is something like why people pick certain formats. Because you
Oh
can
yeah.
you can play in any format and be a spike. You can be a commander player that at least you and I kind of derisively call just a completely casual format, but play it like a spike. And so you could still be a spike in commander. And you can be a standard spike or a pioneer spike or a modern spike, but you can also be something else in all of those things. So it doesn't cover that. It's not like, well, only spikes play this and only Johnnies play that. There's a whole mix of everybody in all of those things, because sometimes maybe a format choice is simply what's available. Because if you play, if you want to play F&M level Magic at our store that we go to, you can draft or you can play modern. You have
Yep.
to go across town to go play Pioneer.
Right.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you anywhere that consistently fires or even tries to fire standard if it's not an RCQ. So, like, if like standard is the format, you're just like, this is the one I want to play. Sorry, you can't play paper Magic around here unless you have a group of people that wants to do it on your own. So like the profiles don't get to capture that. They don't get to capture things like financial restraints. For a long time I wasn't able to have the same kind of collection I do now because when we started this game I was maybe a year or two out of college, still searching for my first full-time actual like real money job and things like that. And so even if I had the same mentality about the game, I was limited in my card choices, so it probably looked like I was more of a Johnny or a Timmy or something like that. If you just looked at the decks I was playing, well, it's because guess what? I couldn't afford to do anything else. So it was probably like, oh, well, he only likes to play that color combination because it is the only thing he likes. Where I was like, well, no, these are the lands I have, so I have to work within this scope. So even though Siege Runner rotated out, I'm still playing Abzan colors. Things like that. Another thing I put down here is time. Some people have more time to invest in the game than other people, and I think that shows up that if you want to be hardcore spike with the game, you probably have to put in a lot of time, even if it's not actually interacting with the cards, but a lot of mental time thinking about the game. And so some other things like that. I don't know if there's anything else that jumps into your mind, Drew, a long list of things that the profiles can't capture in terms of why people, engage with the game. But that's what I brainstormed up.
Well, the thing that I was thinking about when you were describing it is that, like, I think that those things for you are enormous pros
Mm-hmm.
for how you developed as a Magic player. And
Probably.
when you, because here's what I remember when we first got into Magic, we played Standard,
Yep.
and you were on primarily green, and then added black, and then you were in Abzan when you
Mm-hmm.
finally were able to pick some cards up.
Yep.
And I remember cards rotated out of the format, and I was I was buying a totally new deck because money.
Yep.
And you were like, I'm playing these 56 cards, and I am trying to find a green 2-drop creature that can do roughly this thing,
Mm-hmm.
so that you could basically play the same list. And I thought, that's weird. Why would you do that? That
Yeah.
isn't. You should just get a new deck. And the thing that I think that did for you was you understood, like, okay, this card fits into this slot within a deck that's trying
Okay.
to accomplish X.
Yeah.
And so the way that the way that I ended up approaching, like, learning about decks, was that I just played all of them.
Yeah. There for a while, you were just like, I'm doing the kitchen sink approach.
Yep. And you specialized and figured out what was good. And then, like, I think the thing that, like, you and I being friends and playing as much as we did is that, like, you were able to figure out, like, because of my variety, you were able to figure out how to play against all that stuff.
Very true.
And because of your specialization, I was able to figure out, okay, like, this thing is a nightmare. Why is it a nightmare? Okay,
Okay,
now
yeah.
I'm doing this other thing and still playing against the nightmare, but it doesn't seem to be as a big a deal for me in this matchup. Why is that?
Yeah.
And so I think that our diverse approaches, which were somewhat forced upon us
True.
when we got into the game, led us both to basically, because you and I had proximity to one another, we were able to basically say, like, we have randomly acquired this kind of knowledge where has it made me like I don't think that I can go to an RCQ and win it, like, I'm not that level of a player.
Hmm.
But, like, I think that when I'm on a deck and I understand how to play it and the matchups that I'm going to see, I think that I can win our F&M.
As
Not
you've done
lately.
many
It's been
times,
going
but
pretty poorly lately.
we all have stretches. You might be on a stretch of bad. I had a stretch last year where I didn't lose for 6 months. So,
Yeah.
It happens.
At all.
Yeah, yes, I did not lose a match for 6 months at F&M.
So I would love to have a stretch like that. That would be great. So, but understanding who you are, why you're that way, what you like, and having that all kind of go in the same direction can feel like herding cats at times.
Yes, it can. But I think the whole point of this episode and why we chose to talk about this topic is because if you do understand all of these things that influence why you like the game and the ways in which you engage with it, you're much more able to then do things like you just talked about, of analyze, why did this work and this not work, or why do I struggle against this thing and not this thing, or you're able to, when you understand what you enjoy out of the game, you're able to craft your experience in a way that then lets you get even more out of it. Because if you're taking that same analytical mindset that you have to figuring out a matchup within a deck, you take that same analytical mindset and apply it to, why did I have fun this time and not last time? You can then craft your experience going forward and avoid things that you're not going to enjoy. Now, unfortunately, if the answer to that is always, oh, I just don't like losing, you're going to lose sometimes. Sorry. But like, if you can figure out, like I did, like, ooh, I don't like playing uninteractive decks or even interactive decks that just have the exact same pattern every single game. And like, one thing I remembered figured out when I was playing the Rhinos deck, and this was before the Violent Outburst ban, was that like, I was trying to figure out mulliganing with the deck, and it was just like, oh, if the opening hand doesn't have the ability to turn 3 Cascade, just send it back, because you're not doing the thing. And yeah, like, oh, then you're just waiting to draw the thing, and I found that I didn't like that. So now I know that if I'm thinking about a deck, or like, hey, is this a deck I might want to play or something, or I want to try, if I can look at it and be like, oh, it's going to have that same property, I know that I don't need to play the deck because I won't enjoy it. And so I can save myself that time, money, energy of going through the ropes with that deck, because I've analyzed my experience in the past and been like, that's not my deck. I need to go and find something else, or there might be a deck that's highly interactive and powerful and wins a lot, but like doesn't have a lot of decisions for you to make. I think a deck like this, and people are going to jump all over me if I say this, but like, it's true in some fashion, is like Tron. Because often they're the point of like a classic Tron game plan, and maybe classic Tron doesn't exist anymore, but here's my 3 Tron lands into a 7-drop was often like, if that 7-drop resolves, I'm probably just winning the game. And even if that thing eventually gets answered, it got me to the point of winning the game. I don't find that exciting, because even if it is powerful and you take multiple game actions because, well, I'm putting in a chromatic sphere and I'm sacking the chromatic sphere and I'm floating green and I'm drawing a card and then I'm using that green mana to play another one. And like, that's a lot of actions, but they're not decisions. It's just, this card is just here to do this.
Yeah, they're dominoes.
Yeah, exactly. There's only a few things that do matter. And so here we go. So anyway, I think that if you can analyze why you enjoy what you enjoy out of it, one, you're just doing a better thing as a person, because in my line of work, as a teacher, I ask my students this fairly often when we're doing things and they get to like pick what they're going to do for a project or something like that. And I'm like, well, what do you like? And they'll tell me something and I'll say, well, why do you like that thing? And they cannot express why.
Sure.
And I think that's true of many people. They just know that they like something or they think they like something. But if you can figure out why you like it, you'll actually end up having a better time, because then you can craft your own experience around that knowledge. And so I think that's a way better way to interact with something. So like, I think that's kind of the point of all of this, is figure out the thing you enjoy and then you'll enjoy it even more.
Right.
So any last thoughts on the psychographic profiles, or kind of the broad topic of figuring out what you like to do in the game?
I think we've said it all.
Okay. So then let's shift over into our card spotlights for the week. And yes, this time there's two, because we've each picked one based on the topic of what's just a card you really enjoy. So Drew, do you want to jump into yours first?
Yeah, I will. I'm just going to bring it up here just real quick.
Yeah.
So I picked a card from a long time ago that I don't think can be played in Modern currently. And it's Anticipate. It's 1 in a blue instant. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And I have cast this card hundreds and hundreds of times. Yeah. I love this card. And the reason why I think I love this card is that this card does the best job of encapsulating what I like about Magic. First of all, it's an instant. So like, you would do something and then I would be like, yeah, I'm going to maximize my mana by playing it on your turn. You know? And then all I'm doing is, you did your turn and now I am going to look for something that gives me an advantage over what you did. And so I get to cast this card, maximize my mana, have the most information at any point in the turn, and look for the thing that helps me the most. And then I get a random draw step right after it. And I just love to do that because I liked to sculpt the game. Yeah. I liked being in control of the game. I wanted to sculpt the game. This card helped me do that. So I really liked it.
Yeah, I think it hits on kind of that thing I've mentioned a couple of times of like, it's a decision you're making and you feel like that decision matters because you've got 3 outcomes. And so if you make the wrong decision, you're like, ooh, I put myself behind because I should have taken that other card. But if you make the right decision, you're like, ooh, look at me, I made the right decision. So thus, me being the person sitting here and making the action mattered. Because if somebody made a different decision sitting in your seat, it's not just like, well, that was the only card I could play, so I played it. And that's just kind of how it worked. It was, ooh, I mattered. And so it makes us feel good because it's like, I want to matter?
Love me a correct decision.
Yeah, so. Right? It really boosts the ego.
Yeah. So what about your card, buddy?
So my card is a card that is not going to be a surprise to absolutely anyone who's seen me in a t-shirt since the fall of 2023, because I have its power and toughness box tattooed on my inner arm right here.
Yeah.
Okay. It'd be way too much work for me to roll up my sleeve, so I'm not going to do it right now. And that is the card Death's Shadow. I have played this creature possibly more than any other creature in Magic history. The only other creature that might rival the number of times I've cast it is now framed on my wall.
Siege Rhino.
But Death's Shadow, I think, shows all of those things that I talked about that I've learned about myself as a Magic player perfectly well. One, it's usually played in highly interactive decks because you have to stop your opponents from doing things, and like I will still lay in bed at night, and as I fall asleep, I'll be thinking about the Gurmag Angler Death Shadow 8 threat version of this deck to this day. That deck was just that was it. That was the thing. And like I'll forever remember like at an F&M, we were playing at the front of the old store, and
Yeah.
I was sitting down, and one of the kids who was playing like Youngblood Standard was standing next to me. And on my turn 1, I went something like Bauble, check my own card, fetch, shock, Street Wraith, Thoughtseize. And he was like, what the hell just happened? And then the next turn, I went fetch, shock, Death Shadow, and I killed my opponent on turn 3 with Temur Battle Rage. And he was just like, what just went on? Because like I did like 7 things in turn 1. So there's a lot of game actions. There's a lot of decisions to make. Ooh, should I play this at this time? What card do I need to take out of my opponent's hand? And then also the dance you play with Death Shadow decks of when do I push my life total down to get something in, and when do I play it slow? So there's tons of decisions to make there. And then, kind of all along the way is, well, how do I attack? How do I not attack? How do I play this? What should I represent? When do I need to go for these things? And so the card just is absolutely fascinating to me because it is just it is a balancing act that you have to do as a player the entire game, and you need to be thinking about what's the best position for me to be in on turn 3 when you're looking at, do I keep this 7 cards or do I go for a mulligan? Because of all of those factors that have to culminate together for it to work. And it definitely is a deck, and probably more so than almost any other deck I've ever played in Magic, that if you win, you're like, that was because of the choices I made and the way I navigated the game, rather than just I fell backwards into really powerful things. Because literally the card your deck is built around is just useless until your life total's at a certain point. But you also can't just like completely dumpster your life total, because there are ways you could just be like, I'm just going to pay 19 life on turn 1 buy. There are ways to do that. But you can't just do it because then somebody's like, gut shot you. And you're like, dang it, I died. So it's that balancing act of navigating through all of these convoluted things to piece together, and you've got to be able to make it work. Did you ever see, I guess you don't have to have seen one movie, but like all the spy movies where somebody has to navigate through the laser beam wires to like get through the thing? It feels like that. So when you get to the end, you're like, yes, I did it. But sometimes you accidentally slip and fall into a laser and you cut your arm off. Whoops.
So I remember watching, I think it was GP or Pro Tour Vancouver, where Death Shadow had its huge coming out party.
Yeah.
And I hated it. I hated it. Which is weird because it's an innovative take on how to win games.
Yeah.
But the reason I hated it is it's completely unintuitive.
Yeah, why are you just throwing away your life total?
Right.
When like that's the thing your opponent has to do. Make your opponent do it. Yeah.
And so, but like that deck persisted in Modern in some iteration or another for like 5 or 6 years.
It doesn't play persist, Drew.
It hung around in Modern for 5 or 6 years in some iteration.
Sorry, I had to.
You little snot.
Yep.
So like, so obviously there's validity to it, and like whether you're powering out a turn 2 Gurmag Angler.
Yep.
5/5, just a 5/5, but you can put a 5/5, no other text on the relevant text on the card on turn 2, or a 8/8. Like, thank God they printed Fatal Push. I mean,
I know. See, Gurmag Angler does have a secret hidden line of text, and it's very faint on the card, but it says enables stubborn denial. And so that was the other hidden line of text on the
I
card.
hate that card too.
I love that
Um,
card. I still want to make that card good.
well, I mean, it's you can. I mean, I don't. I. So that's the thing, like that answer right there. Like, I still want to make that card good. Like, that's a 1 mana counter spell with just a little hill that you have to climb, right?
Yep.
And the quantity and quality of players that are just going to tap out every single time is so high that, like, I don't think that you need to do much outside of playing the card to make it good.
I mean, to be fair, I have used the just 4 spike version of that card on many people.
Yes, correct.
Many people.
So
And it's glorious.
it is glorious.
Yeah. But yeah, so like these cards are cards that we've both enjoyed, cast a lot. Yeah, I teach this language. And
I'm impressed.
and I think in some ways the cards both helped us figure out like those things that we enjoy in the game, and also
Yeah.
then allowed us to express that on the other side. Because maybe casting and anticipate helped you figure out like, oh, I like doing this. I like casting this card and just finding the next card more than sometimes casting the next card, because that next card just felt necessary, and this was the fun thing.
I mean, I've known in games that I'm dead on the next turn, and there's no card in my deck that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll cast 3 or 4 cards, go to my turn and cast another couple cards, and be like, "Yep, none of this mattered, but thanks for letting me cast cards and draw cards. This has been fun."
I remember when Amonkhet was coming out, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna bring back cycling into Standard." I was super excited because it's like, it's more actions to take. Just like, oh, I didn't have anything to do. On the end of your turn, I'm going to cycle this card and draw another random one. Yes, more things I can do that made me feel like I did something in the game. So, hey, that's that. Lots of cards we enjoy, but I figured this was a good way just to kind of shine a little light on a couple of them.
Yeah, so we're going to move to our last segment here, and it's a new segment for everybody, and it's something that we're calling Dissecting the Deck.
Was that the name that you had told me originally? I didn't remember. I think it was. So yeah.
So the idea is that, like, here at Think Twice, it doesn't matter what it's about in Magic. We want to take another look at it. And that includes decks. I mean, we're all putting them together to play the game. So let's talk about them. And so the one that sits atop the format currently and was right there prior to the ban and unbannings is Boros Energy. So let's talk about it. But I want to start with the mechanic that this deck is built around. So Energy got created, back in, I can't remember what, Kaladesh?
Yes.
And it was unbelievably parasitic, which means that, like, if you had good cards that had energy on them, they just wanted to play with the other cards that were parasitic, which had energy on them.
Mm-hmm.
So it became, all you have to do to make a worthwhile deck is to pair together a curve of cards that had the best outcome that produced or used energy.
Mm-hmm.
So now we don't have parasitic energy cards because the deck really only plays a couple: Galvanic Discharge.
Yep.
And Guide of Souls.
So I've got a list pulled up here from Goldfish, and it looks like other ones that might be noticeable that are energy related are also Static Prison.
Yep.
And sometimes it looks like the sideboard will also play some Wrath of the Skies. But 3 or 4 cards, not even all 4 ofs in there. And really, Static Prison and Discharge are just both removal spells that use energy, just in slightly different ways. So essentially the same thing.
And those are excellent reasons why those cards are included in the deck. But the single card that makes this deck come along is Guide of Souls.
Yes.
So a 1 mana 1/2 that when another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life and you gain 1 energy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to combat, you can spend 3 energy to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target attacking creature, and it gains flying, and it becomes an angel for some reason.
Why does it become an angel? I don't know. There's
I
probably
don't
some
know.
sort of flavor thing in there that matters. But yeah, that's always been like, why does it? Why does it become? Why do I care if it becomes an angel? It doesn't have any synergy with angels.
Vorthos care. Um,
Apparently, he does wherever he might be.
but for 1 mana, you are doing so. Mechanics that reward you for doing something that you would otherwise normally do in the game are good.
Yeah.
So, like playing creatures, lots of decks do that. So now when I play a creature, every creature that I play has, when this creature enters the battlefield, gain 1 life, gain 1 energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so for 1 mana, this thing doesn't die to Orcish Bowmasters, and is an engine. It's a 1 mana engine.
Yeah.
And the only thing you have to do in this deck is to figure out which other cards are the most efficient at turning that engine on and keeping it going. So, Alan, what are those cards?
They're the other cards that are printed in the same set.
It's just something that they've done with
Yeah.
modern Horizons that I'm not a huge fan of.
So yeah, so you already mentioned Guide of Souls. One of the other cards that pairs great with it is a creature that is cheap to play on its own and for free spits out other creatures, especially if you already have a Guide of Souls in play, because it meets the condition that this second card needs. That's Ocelot Pride. If you're not familiar with Ocelot Pride, it's a 1 mana 1/1 cat with first strike and a lifelink. Needs all of those. And it has an ability at the beginning of your end step. If you gained life this turn, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. We're not done. It also has the ability called Ascend from Ixalan, which is at any point while this card's in play, if you have 10 or more permanents on the board, you get this thing called the City's Blessing, or because of this card, people now nickname it the Kitty's Blessing because it's a cat. Kitty cat, meow. And you never lose that. Once you have the City's Blessing, you can never lose it. It doesn't matter if all of your permanents get destroyed. You still have that thing. And so the rest of the Ocelot Pride ability says you created the 1/1 cat token. Then, if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So on surface level, if you have the City's Blessing, you created the 1 token from this thing, you'll make a second one. So every time you make that token, you do the thing you just talked about. You put another creature into play, which triggers Guide of Souls. You've gained a life, key for Ocelot Pride every turn, and you have another energy, which then means later on it's much easier for a card for you to add those counters and make an angelic cat, I guess, and swing in and gain life and continue the whole thing going. One of the other cards that is also fantastic with Guide of Souls is Ajani Nakatl Pariah, also from Modern Horizons 3, also a white card, also a cat. Why did they make Guide of Souls a cat? Tell me that. So Ajani, it's not. It's not.
Oh,
It's a human. That was my joke. Is it should have been a cat because then you have all of them together. Maybe instead of angels, it should turn it into a cat.
makes sense.
Yeah, it would only make more sense, right? So Ajani Nakatl Pariah is a 2 mana, 1 and a white, should be white. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. 1/2, and when it enters, you create a 2/1 white cat creature token. So overall, 2 bodies, 3 power, 3 toughness. And then whenever a cat you control dies, you exile Ajani, flip him onto his Planeswalker side, and he has 3 abilities. They're all good. And it is +2, put a +1/+1 counter on each cat you control. Good because you're spitting out a bunch of cats. Also, then when cats enter, in this case 2 creatures entered, Guide of Souls double trigger. Ajani's 0 ability is create a 2/1 cat. Guide of Souls loves that. It also has this other text on it that people seem to forget is wildly powerful. And this is also if you control a red permanent, then deal damage to any target equal to the number of creatures you control. This deck makes a lot of creatures, a lot of them for free too. And then it also has some other ability. It's looks like a -4. Each opponent chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among them that they control, and you get rid of all the rest. So they get to keep one of each type of thing. But I think that ability is the least to worry about of all of these. But these two cards play really well with Guide of Souls because of all the things that Drew talked about, where you want more creatures and you want them efficient and cheap. And then they also synergize now with each other because Ocelot Pride needs life gain. And when the Ocelot Pride enters, the Guide of Souls gives it life, so you don't even have to attack to do it. And it's just like, oh. And it's a cat, so it flips to Johnny. All the things.
They are so cheap. They're so cheap.
The most is 2 mana.
It's just unbelievable how cheap these cards were.
Yeah.
So not only do we have this core that I think that if you're playing white, I really think that you should be asking yourself, should I be putting Guide, Pride, and a Johnny in my deck?
I think the question really needs to be, is there a reason I shouldn't be putting them in my deck?
Right. So right now, this grouping of cards is starting to push towards, if you're playing this color, you should be doing this thing. That's starting to push towards, like, maybe this needs to be on a watch list.
Yeah, like we need to pay attention. And is that just because they're the new hotness, or is it because they really are, if you're playing white, just play these and decision made for you?
It's the latter. So here's the other thing. This is why the deck is Boros, as far as I am concerned. You get to play Flage, Titan's Fury.
Titan of Fire's Fury.
Titan of Fire's Fury.
Yeah.
So now, since everything that we talked about either cost 1 or 2, we can just go to the next place on our curve and have a creature, 1 white-red, that is Lightning Helix.
Mm-hmm.
So deal 3 damage, gain 3 life. So you and I in a previous show had talked about cards that are both answers and threats.
Yep.
Flage is that.
Very
It
much
is
so.
both an answer and a threat at the same time. You play the front half of it. It's going to come down and likely kill something that was played in the early game. So it's removal. It's going to extend your resources. You might get a life and an energy from E.T. Bean, from Guide of Souls.
Yeah.
And then you are going to gain another 3 life from its own effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into your graveyard because as a Titan, you have to sack it if you haven't escaped it from your yard. Okay, well, now that it's in your yard, so long as you are hitting land drops, you're likely able to escape that card from your yard. So your opponent is going to help you by killing some of your creatures and filling your graveyard and things like that. And you're going to play instants and sorceries and other cards that are going to...
And fetch lands and surveil and all that sort of stuff.
And so you're going to also get there. And then now, for 4 mana, which is way too cheap for what this thing does, you can bring that back to the battlefield, get another trigger that you got from the front half of it, but this time it sticks around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 6/6 that can attack and repeat those triggers every turn.
Yeah, and really another thing that has elevated Flage as one of the very top cards in the format is also the deck includes usually some number. The list I'm looking at right now is 3 copies of Arena of Glory, which is kind of like secret mode. All red creatures in Modern can have haste. So evaluate them as, well, they have haste. So that means on the turn you escape Flage, if you use the Arena of Glory ability to give it haste when you cast it, it comes down, does the Lightning Helix, you dealt 3 damage to something, you gained 3 life. You then go to attack, you get the second trigger, you deal 3 more damage, you gain 3 more life. And then, as you just mentioned, the card is a 6/6 on its own. It represents 12 damage dealt to your opponent in some variety of choices. And you gained 6 life. Like, it's an 18 life point swing for 4 mana.
When this card was previewed, I thought, I don't know why anybody would want a more expensive Lightning Helix. That doesn't seem very good. What I didn't learn about the card right off the bat is that it's going to be extending. Like, even if you don't have the trio of cards and
Yeah.
the synergy that's inherently built into them, like, this card still does the thing, which is to say, I'm an answer and a
Mm-hmm.
threat. I'm recursive, and I am big enough by myself that if you do not answer me, I will end the game in short order.
Yeah.
Like, if you get to attack with this and your opponent doesn't have something the ability to kill it or to block it on board, it's 9 a turn
Yeah.
and you're gaining 3.
Yeah, that's 12 point life swing for anybody who can do some math out there.
So I mean, that's on par with Archon when it gets to
Yep.
attack, you know. So I'm like, so that is right. I mean, unless you're like through the breaching Emrakul onto the board, that's the bar that you're shooting for as to what's
Mm-hmm.
good
Yeah.
in modern, and you just get to do this thing on curve, both sides of it
Right.
in this deck, you know. And so it presents to your opponent a real problem. What do you deal with? Do you make card choices for your deck that kills Guide Pride of Johnny, or are you too worried about them getting to Flage
Mm-hmm.
and recurring it out of their yard however long, because now you've helped them fill their yard? So, like, you are spending so many card choices just to answer what they're doing. You're now inhibiting your ability to win your game.
Yeah, and if you go to the other side of things, which is often like, man, this deck, if we get to the long game, is more powerful than mine. So what do I have to do? I have to have an aggressive deck. So instead of putting in answer cards, what I'm doing, I'm just going to try to get you dead. Well, then Flage answers that too, because it's like, oh, well, I got to turn 3. Very few decks can kill on turn 3, and excuse me. And then they're going to play Flage, and even if you don't have a creature on board or something they can target, they just target you and they gain 3 life, and they probably negated at least one attack from one of your creatures on an earlier turn, so it's like it never happened. And so then they're much more likely to get to that good end game, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I can't attack them down very efficiently. And then, like you said, how do I pick the right answers? Because, like, well, I can have 4 fatal pushes in my deck. Maybe I need some ways to answer Flage. So the best way to answer Flage is to snipe it out of the graveyard. So then maybe I'm in black. Okay, so I want some Nihil spell bombs. But like you said, then as you start to add in more and more of these answers, well, I need more answers for their small creatures. So okay, lightning bolts too. Well, now we're adding more and more cards in. You're not going to have as many things to win the game with. So even if you do get to that point of I've answered a bunch of their stuff, you haven't presented a clock because you spent all of your time answering.
Yep.
But their threats are so efficient and powerful on their own that any one of them could end up being the thing that wins the game. And so thus, how do you actually effectively attack a deck that can present such a fast clock like this one, but also a very robust mid to long game plan that can drag them back into a game that they were way behind in?
Yeah. So my challenge when thinking about this deck, and I haven't had to directly play against it yet,
Okay.
but I'm probably gonna at some point. Because card for card removal isn't efficient because their creatures are so cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately go to, well, let's kill a bunch of them all at once. That'll do it,
Yeah.
you know. And like, so I'm thinking Wrath. Okay, well, what Wrath do I choose? I can do Supreme Verdict and just get everything, or do I play one of the new baby Wraths like Toxic Deluge or like Brotherhood End or something like that? You know, in a certain context, they could be quite efficient. They happen on curve much more efficiently. I'm not as likely to get destroyed while I'm waiting to cast one of them, that type of thing. But then the problem becomes, and you've already stated this, like now they just pivot to, well, now I'm on the Flage plan.
Mm-hmm.
So I now need to have interaction either for their graveyard or some kind of efficient, hopefully exiling threat
Yeah.
to Flage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do I play a card like Surgical Extraction, which finally allows me to get an advantage in mana? and I can do it at instant speed to get rid of their Phlages? Do I just, if I'm also in white, do I play like Rest in Peace to hit their graveyard? There's a lot of, or do I want to play a more surgical tool like something like Nile Spellbomb, what's the
Soul Guide Lantern.
what's Soul Guide Lantern, to snipe the offender out of the graveyard, something like that. And then the problem is always now, I've answered. I have to now present a threat, because otherwise, if nothing changes, they just draw their more of their deck back into the same situation I just got out of, and I don't know that my deck will do the same thing. So, and this is the elegance of this deck, is it's really an aggro deck that has a built-in recursive mid-game, and they don't need to do things like add cards that draw them a bunch of cards. What they're doing is they're adding a bunch of cards that makes the stuff they're already doing way more efficient. Like, what is the 2-mana enchantment? Goblin Bombardment.
That's what I wanted to talk about next.
Yeah, 1 and a red for an enchantment. Sack a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So, if I point a lightning bolt at Guide of Souls, they can, for no mana, at instant speed, sack it to Goblin Bombardment, and if they could kill one of my creatures, or they could deal damage to me, and now they have gained just that much more advantage out of a card that was for 1 mana doing a ton of stuff.
Goblin Bombardment is one of the cards that has really made me appreciate the construction of this deck. So even though overall, if you ask me if I was a fan of this deck, I would say no. It's not the kind of deck I want to play necessarily. And, people get on me like, well, you like making decisions and those decisions matter and you make a lot of decisions here. And I might disagree a little bit, because I think if you have any combination of Guide, Pride, and a Johnny, it doesn't really matter in what order that you spew them out in, or as long as you have 3 total, I don't care which ones you have, you're probably doing fine. If it's all 3 Guide of Souls, fine. All 3 Ocelot Prides, cool. 3 of Johnnies, whatever. And so to me, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter as long as I have them. I just put them down. Anyway, sorry, that was tangential. Words with thoughts make ideas. But I do appreciate the construction of this deck because of card inclusions like Goblin Bombardment, because, as we talked about, like, well, okay, I've got to pack in removal to deal with these small creatures. So Goblin Bombardment turns your opponent's removal spell into another advantage for you, because it's, okay, you're going to Fatal Push my Guide of Souls. Well, instead of it just dying, it died and it dealt you 1 more damage. It gives it a parting shot as it goes out the door. And so you're like, oh, like, now I don't really want to point my removal at the creatures, but I'm forced to, because otherwise they're going to deal 3 damage to me instead of 1. But so then even Wraths aren't always an effective way to deal with this deck, because you don't buy yourself the time that you normally think Wraths are going to, because the creatures are flung at you. So if you're like, I'm going to Wrath their 4 creatures out of the board with my Supreme Verdict, well, your Supreme Verdict also has a line of text that says pay for life. And that's not great when you're going up against a deck that we just talked about can have an 18-point life total swing on a single turn. Hey, it also would happen right about the same point in the game that you could do a, Supreme Verdict. And then you're like, well, but now I tapped out and they go to their turn, and what if they can just cast that Flage because, I just put a bunch of cards in the graveyard for them. That's the other thing I like about Goblin Bombardment, is it's a way to fuel for the Flage. If you're like, I want to escape this Flage, but I don't have enough cards in my yard, well, I'll just sack some of my creatures to my Goblin Bombardment, because Flage is a bigger upgrade over those creatures. I'd trade 2 Ocelot Prides for a Flage, especially if I have an Arena of Glory in play.
Yeah.
So, like, there's a lot of this, like, when you look at the deck, it's, man, sure, there's just a lot of raw power level in the cards, but there's also a lot of this works with this, which works with this piece over here, which works with this piece up here, and connects back to that same first piece, and they're all just kind of fueling this cycle of each other, and so it's extremely efficient. And so there's really a lot of elegance in those card decisions, but I think it'd be cooler if it was elegance in card decisions that didn't have quite so much of just the raw power level that these cards have too.
So I like what you just talked about there, and I just want to highlight what I consider to be the remaining cards that make this deck go.
Yeah.
This deck had cards banned out of it. It had Amped Raptor, and it had the One Ring banned out from under it. It is now still on the top of the format. And it's because it was able to do things like, we're going to play Goblin Bombardment. That's now an auto include. Or the cards that I want to talk about, Ranger Captain of Eos and Seasoned Pyromancer. So Ranger Captain of Eos, 1 white for a human soldier. It's a 3/3. When this card enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with CMC 1 or less, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. You can sack this creature. Your opponents can't cast non-creature spells this turn. That does 3 things. It's a body.
Yeah, a
it
3/3
goes and
body's
finds you
not
your
bad.
engine,
Yeah.
and it can prevent your opponent from interacting for 1 turn. Probably the one you need to win the game.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, you can't cast that board wipe, or your big key spell. You know, you can't resolve your persist. Sorry.
Right. So, and then of course, and so like now, Seasoned Pyromancer has got some room to be played. So 1 red for a human shaman 2/2. When this card enters the battlefield, discard 2 cards. You want to do that for Flage. Then draw 2 cards. You want to do that because they're all great.
Yeah.
For each non-land card discarded this way, Flage, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token. 3 red, exile Seasoned Pyromancer from your graveyard, create 2 1 red elemental creature tokens. So I mean, like, if your game is going long and you've drawn lands as opposed to creatures, now you have a built-in way to like utilize your mana effectively, you know. And it's just, everything in this deck has such a Venn diagram that overlaps to such a degree that you're just like, I don't know if there's any other better version than this, right? And like, I looked,
Yeah.
I was like, there's got to be some green card, or like maybe Convoke or something to hit like a infinite combo or something like that. Like there's a different version of this that's as good. I don't know, dude. Like, when you can have the One Ring and Amped Raptor banned out from under you, take over the top spot in the meta, and like you just fill it in with cards with this amount of synergy, I think you're sitting pretty solid until something pretty dramatic changes in Modern.
Yeah, and like I don't even think you captured all of the synergy that Seasoned Pyromancer has with the deck, because you mentioned the discarding cards for Flage is good, but like this thing could potentially make you 4 1/1 tokens. Well, if you have a Guide of Souls in play, that's 4 life and 4 energy, right? Yeah. It also synergizes with your Goblin Bombardment, because that's potentially 5 more bodies to sacrifice to it. So this card could read in this deck: 3 mana, fuel your Flage, deal 5 damage, gain 5 life, and gain 5 energy. That's a lot. That's a lot for if there was a card that said that 1 red and then all of those things, people would be like, we're playing this card. We're gonna do that. Card. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you phrase it like that, it's very easy to see why, you know, they're playing a full set.
Yeah.
In this deck. And like, I do think Magic players have so often misrepresented what cards can do. Like, oh, this card is the new Splinter Twin, or this card is the new name your card that was really good 5 years ago.
Or one of your favorites, Drew, people calling Veil of Summer 1 mana Cryptic Command.
Okay. So what, unfortunately, when in this context, Seasoned Pyromancer is every bit the description.
Yes, it really is.
When I was trying to convince people that the One Ring was just not good, I would be like, let's imagine there's a 4 mana colorless sorcery that was deal 3 damage to yourself, draw 7 cards, gain protection on your next turn, and like something else.
Yeah, right.
And they were like, "Would you play that?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "It's yeah, but it's just an artifact that you have to tap instead of a
Yeah,
sorcery."
that's the one ring. Except for it can draw you more than that, you know?
Yeah.
So we've talked about what makes this deck really good. So does that just mean it's good against everything? Do you think?
Well, so the problem that I think this deck has is that the format that it's playing in currently is hostile to it, which is the fact that like there are a lot of combos,
Mm-hmm.
and this deck doesn't interact well with decks that can be like my Amalia combo, my Amalia combo, my Yawgmoth combo, my Titan combo is potentially being able to go over the top
Mm-hmm.
in a similar time frame.
Yeah,
You're not
decks that.
playing negate and counter spells.
Yeah, because that's discard and counter spells are the traditional ways that you have to fight through a combo deck, but um, this deck does struggle against those because those are decks that can win not just through attacking through your board and not necessarily through traditional ways of attacking your life total. Like Yawgmoth, for instance, can easily win through attacking your life total, but it can do it nearly infinitely. So it doesn't
Yep.
care if you've gained a bunch of life from Flages. Like, I'm just gonna churn through it. And the same thing with Titan. Titan can just deal immense amounts of damage on a single turn. And like, I don't even know the potential of the current builds because, like I said, when I played the deck, it was 3 years ago. But I remember counting up turns of being like, oh, if I can do this, and like I would put in 3 Titans and give them all +4/+0 and double strike because you can just do stupid things, and then plus you paired it with Valakut and Dryad triggers, and you're like, oh, I just dealt 87 damage on this turn. And so it's like, yeah, sure, nice 9 life you gain. I'm real proud of you. So I think that must mean that, like, if you really want to target this deck, the best way is probably something that, as you said, can go over the top, which most likely means a combo, or something that just does something really big. But I'm struggling to think of what non-combo deck right now in the format fits the bill for that.
So there's no other aggro deck that I think plays
I don't know if there's just
it
another
threatens this
aggro
deck at
deck.
all. Well, that's true. And there's no other mid-range decks at all. We disagree on the definition of mid-range.
Would you consider like the classic Dimir Oculus Murktide deck a mid-range deck or no?
It's as close to my definition as that currently exists in the format.
Yes, yeah, it's a modern mid-range deck.
Yeah. And I think there are Jeskai Control could do it because of Wrath of Skies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if there is a card that has a chance to beat Boros Energy, it's Wrath of Skies. The problem then becomes, how do you fuel Wrath of Skies? How do you find Wrath of Skies in this deck?
Wait. I have an idea.
All right.
What if they made a really cheap card that, as you played other cards, you just kind of naturally gained energy? Would that help Wrath of the Skies?
It would.
Do we have something that meets that criteria?
We do.
Would it be
here's
helpful if it was in
problem,
the same
like-
color too?
Yeah, it would. So here's the thing: is that like you're very cleverly redefining Guide of Souls.
Was it clever? I don't think it was clever.
Okay, so uncleverly
Yeah.
redefining Guide of Souls. And this is the issue: is that any deck that's looking to beat Boros Energy inherently ends up looking very similar to Boros Energy.
Yeah.
So you're not so much doing something to beat it, you're just playing a different version of whatever this thing is. So like, is the best way to attack Boros Energy simply to play a different mirror of the deck?
I hope the answer is no, but you may not
But
be
you
wrong.
fear, yeah,
Yeah, and part of the thing that's starting to lean toward that is Wrath of the Skies is now becoming fairly stock in the sideboard of Boros Energy, probably very specifically, at least in majority, for the mirror, because it's the best way to answer my opponent's stuff, and I have energy sitting around, and if I have a Flage and my opponent doesn't have a Flage in the yard, then I can get ahead because I'll kill both of all of our stuff, but then I get the Flage down, and now they have to answer it, and only a hasty Flage can kill another Flage. So
right,
then you get into that, like, well, okay, here we are, sort of standoff. You know, the other way to fuel Wrath of the Sky, since you brought it up and you mentioned Jeskai Control, I just pulled up a list. They're playing Wrath of the Skies. If you don't know Wrath of the Skies, really quickly, it's X white white. You get X energy. So base the card costs 2, but then you only get zeros and you get no energy, but you can spend other energy for this. And it says then pay any amount of energy, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. So on its own, it could be an expensive wrath to get a lot of things, 5 mana to get all 3s and below. Or it can be the most efficient wrath you've ever seen because you have a pile of energy sitting around from other cards. If you
yep,
don't want to put things like Guide of Souls in your own deck, because if your game plan is Wrath of the Skies, you're kind of cannibalizing yourself. There's only 2
correct,
other cards that people are playing that does this. We've already mentioned one. It's Galvanic Discharge, is one, and so that's just choose a creature, planeswalker. You get energy. You get 3 energy, and then you can pay any amount, deal that much damage to it. The other one is a card called Tune the Narrative, which is draw a card, you get 2 energy. So these are the ways that you can play energy and fuel the Wrath of the Skies without playing Guide of Souls. But let me hit you with some numbers really fast, okay?
yes, I love numbers.
Okay. So if we're looking at MTG Goldfish for the modern metagame, you can say what you want about how completely accurate it is, but it's good enough for these purposes. Right now, it says Boros Energy is 21.1% of the metagame. Over a fifth, that's pretty strong. Would you like to take a guess as to what percent of the metagame you think Jeskai Control is, Drew?
I will say less than 1%.
You are correct. It is 0.7%. So
Nailed it.
I will leave that up to you, listeners, to decide whether or not you think that is because one energy package is better than the other or not. I certainly have my opinion.
So let me ask you this. If this is the best version that the meta has produced of how to play Wrath of Skies,
Mm-hmm.
and the deck is good against the best deck and the deck that is currently gaining more market share in Modern,
Mm-hmm.
and should have, based upon its colors, based upon the fact that it wants to play at instant speed and is a control deck, should have game against combo decks. Why isn't this a bigger part of the meta?
So I think you're going to hit on a couple of things. A control deck based on those like attributes you just listed wants to play at instant speed, has access to good answer colors, things like that. Theoretically can answer a wide variety of things. It can't answer all of them at the same time. So if you're tuned to beat Boros Energy, you're going to get beat up by decks very much like Eldrazi, which according to Goldfish is the second most played deck in the metagame, because they don't care about your Galvanic Discharge and
Right.
your Wrath of the Skies isn't very good against them either, and things like that. So you're like, okay, well that's not great. So I think it's hard to tune a control deck effectively to the wide variety of things you might face. And in order to make yourself good against one, you hurt yourself sometimes severely against another. The other thing is your mana considerations. To play a deck that can cast blue counterspell on turn 2, potentially also white Wrath of the Skies as early as turn 2 or later, but also support white red all in one turn for an escaped Flage is a lot to ask of a mana base to pull off. You have to be, you're double pipped in all colors. And if you stumble along those lines, you're probably going to lose because you can't cast your cards. But then also, you need to do things like play 2 Arena of Glory in your counterspell deck.
Right.
That's not fantastic.
No.
And so the only way to pull off the mana base well means you're just hurting yourself a lot. And yes, you have Flage to make up for some of that, but you have to get to the point where Flage makes up for it. And I think that is something you're asking a whole lot of a deck, where what we've seen before traditionally with 3-color control decks is it's like, I'm mostly this one, I'm kind of the second one, and there's an itty bitty amount of the third one. And so you're just like, I can put in just a couple of side lands that'll throw in for the splash, and I can support the one single pip of the third color that I have on that one card that I think is worth playing, and 1 or 2 sideboard cards, and be fine with all of the others, because then mostly I'm just a 2-color deck, so those are all set. And you cannot do that in this deck. And so I think it, in theory, should be more popular or play more popularly. But I think in practice, you're going to find that it struggles in places and in ways that you're like, I should be good at this because I should have all of these instant speed answers for this, that, and the other thing, and I should have a wide access, but you just don't have the ability to pull it off all at once. I think the other thing that goes against it is the metagame is mostly defined by the highest levels of competitive play. And a lot of people that are grinders at big tournaments don't want to play a deck that is going to play really long, dragged out games, because when you're playing 15 plus 18 total rounds of Magic, if you go to the final in 2 days, you want to be able to finish games as fast as possible and not have to be dragging yourself mentally through that every single round just to get wins, when you could play something like Boros Energy that is going to win some games so much faster and be at worst just as efficient. So you're incentivized more to play the deck that is more proactive than reactive.
The thing that I think, if there's something that's going to threaten this deck's spot in the meta, it's because when the next Modern Horizon set comes out, they're going to give us something good to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to be like, ooh. And then is
Piece of
that
candy.
good thing? Right. James Wood from Family Guy.
Yep.
Love it. Is that new next good thing better than what Boros Energy is at its best, most efficient build? And if it is, then that will push it out of the format, and then you just have to deal with the new thing.
Yeah. So, like, to start to culminate this conversation, we've talked about what makes Boros Energy good. We've talked about where some of the matchups lie. Is this a deck that is just has too much synergy, too much going for it, that the metagame isn't going to be able to naturally counter it? I'm not saying necessarily not make it. It might still be the most popular deck in the metagame, but just going back to these metagame percentage numbers, we said Boros Energy was 21.1. The second most popular deck is Eldrazi Ramp at 11.2%. We are 10% more Boros Energy than Eldrazi Ramp. Is this a deck that the metagame has the ability to hit this deck just enough through people building their sideboards for it or tweaking their main deck to be more slanted to it, to bring Boros Energy down to 13 to 15%, where then it's like, okay, it's the top deck, but it's not so far above everything else that it's not reasonable? Or are we seeing that 20% number being this idea of like, the only reason it's not higher is because other people like playing other things?
Well, I think the thing that this deck really has going for it that's never going to show up in um, like any kind of like deck description, is that this is not difficult to play.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I can evaluate my opening hand very easily.
Yeah. Do
Do
I
I
have
have
one drop, two
two
drop, three
land?
drop? Do it.
Do I have a curve?
Mm-hmm.
What do I have a guide of souls? These are easy yes or no questions that I don't
Yeah.
have to think about. I can just look at and assess immediately. The deck synergy means that even if I don't have an optimal hand, like I can go get those pieces or disrupt you enough that I can just win with what I have on board, vomiting out more stuff
Mm-hmm.
as I do the things that the cards do. And so the card that I am wondering, and to be honest, I don't have any real hope for, is that could curtail this deck is engineered explosives. Um, because it hits X and down, I believe. Does it
No, it's only X.
only X?
So it's
So like
it's
if
sunburst. So that's how many
yeah.
counters it gets. So however many colors you put in is how many counters it gets. 2, sacrifice it. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on engineered explosives.
So even if you're on the draw, if you have one in hand, you can go 1 mana, play this,
Mm-hmm.
and then hold up the threat of wiping out all their 1-drops,
Yeah.
and that might be enough, especially if they go guide pride, and you're like, okay, they go guide, I'm going to play EE. Are they really not going to play pride?
I mean,
You know,
maybe, maybe not, depending on what the rest of their hand is. But if like they might just be like, okay, fine, I just won't commit another 1-drop and I'll just play a 2-drop, or I'll put down tokens, or the engineered explosives doesn't get rid of the 1/1 tokens that the Ocelot Pride leaves behind. So I feel like there are going to be a lot of situations where engineered explosives works against energy, but there's going to be other times you're like, this is the card I had for this, and it didn't do anything like what I wanted to do.
so there used to be, and this might be too late at 3 mana, but there used to be I thought there was like a red white card that had flash, and it had 0 power, and you could tap it to deal 1 damage to a card and every other card that shared its name.
Ooh, maybe.
And it was like a pre-COVID creature wrath
Huh.
that got played in blue red decks. And I think it's 1 blue red for a creature like a 0-2 or 0-3 creature, and its tap ability is deal 1 damage to target creature and every creature that shares the same name as that creature.
Okay.
And that could curtail the deck. It's not going to stop guide from like. So here's my question: why isn't Sun Cleanser being played anymore in sideboards?
So Sun Cleanser is the one that stops the energy.
Yeah, players can't get counters.
Oh yeah, okay. So here I've got it up. I'll read it. When it enters the battlefield, choose one. Remove all counters from target creature. It can't have counters put on it for as long as Sun Cleanser remains on the battlefield. Or target opponent loses all counters. That player can't get counters for as long as Sun Cleanser remains on the battlefield. My only guess as to the reason why this card isn't played more is one, because it's in white, so you're already playing the Boros energy deck, so thus you don't need this to answer energy. You just trade off each other's resources over and over again.
Is it Staticaster?
Oh, is that what it was? Okay. Pull that up here in a second.
Okay, yeah.
But so, and then the other thing with Sun Cleanser, I think, is that it's a 1/4, and so it stops you from getting energy, but it doesn't stop the Flage, it doesn't stop the Goblin Bombardment, it doesn't stop the all of those other things. It only stops the one avenue of the deck, and so, and it doesn't do enough to like present a counter threat on its own. So you have to draw something else anyway.
So the mass removal effects are either too late or too narrow. And then the other stuff that we found is either not efficient enough because of like mana cost,
Mm-hmm.
or it's too narrow in what it does to stop the engine entirely. You can only slow it down slightly.
Yeah, because it's not all an energy deck. It's called Boros Energy, but there are 4 cards, as we mentioned, throughout the entire deck, main plus sideboard, that run energy. So, like, okay, I stopped your energy, but as we mentioned, well, you didn't stop every other card in the deck. It's not like the old school standard days of teamer energy, where if you stopped their ability to get energy, which you couldn't in standard, but let's imagine you could, like with a sun cleanser, then the deck didn't really do anything. Where this one is like, okay, you stopped my energy, cool, but I think that kind of circles back to what we said was the issue with trying to fight this deck. It's not just load up on my graveyard hate, it's not just put in mass creature removal, it's not just hate out energy. You have to do all of those things, or what I think is going to end up being the most effective way for other decks to fight it is pick one of those axes and then present your own strong clock alongside that. So it's like, okay, the way I've found the most success playing against energy is I'm going to stop your early creature game and then be playing a deck that presents my own clock afterward, or during, as I'll get to in just a quick second here before we talk about Izzet Staticaster, to make it so that then I've slowed you down and now you're forced to answer me, but that's harder because you don't have your board. And so where I found that actually has some success is the deck that I've recently picked up that I'm really enjoying it in. That's Yawgmoth, because in enacting the Yawgmoth game plan of sacking my creatures with Yawgmoth's ability and drawing cards, I'm also destroying Boros Energy's board. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to come in and maybe play a couple early removal spells. Bowmaster your Ocelot Pride down. Cool, do that. And then, so I'm just trying to make it so I don't die fast. And then presenting something that, as we already mentioned, goes over the top. But I think you have to do that first portion in order to make it so you can go over the top. Because if you play a completely uninteractive combo, they can just present a fast enough clock that you might be dead before your combo actually goes off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, I think that, like, on some level, you've got to be able to slow down what they're doing and overwhelm them with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a good version of that yet.
Yeah. So to just one quick sentence about Staticaster, because you brought it up, I think it fits in exactly what you said. It's too narrow or not good enough because it deals 1 damage, which stops Pride, doesn't stop Guide, that sort of thing. So I think it fits in that same category as the other answers we mentioned.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I think we have hit the end of our list of stuff. Drew, before you run us through the sign off, I have one quick announcement for our listeners, and that is just if you want to check out another way to watch, spoiler, to interact with the podcast, we are also now going to be on YouTube. So if you want to find us on YouTube, you actually get to see our wonderful, beautiful, smiling faces, because these are faces made for radio. And but you can do that. I'll have card images up and things like that throughout the time. It'll be a little bit rough at the minute because, like, today I'm getting used to running it. But if you want to find us on YouTube, we are Think Twice Podcast. You'll see the same logo image with just Think Twice in purple and blue and MTG Podcast, the gradient thing, on there. So you can interact with us that way. Throw us a subscribe or something like that, so we can, maybe other people can maybe find us easier, and maybe down the road we'll even put up some other types of content on there. You know, maybe we'll talk about other Magic things or record us playing or something like that.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
So everyone can be like, Alan is the better player. Oh, now we have definitive proof every time.
Yes. Yep.
So, all right, I love it. Let's do it. Let's do it soon. So, all right, everybody. Really appreciate you guys spending your time with us. Hope you learned something, or maybe think about the game slightly differently, or just kind of scratched your head and been like, I don't know what those guys are talking about.
Yeah, they're full of it.
Yeah, they are. We are full of it, but we can do this, so we're doing it. So I
Exactly.
really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. And anything, Alan, you want to say?
No, I think that's it.
All right, guys. Remember, think twice.